So hello to everyone and welcome to the speakers as well as the audience. So we start our webinar on the COVID-19 lesson, building a strategy for, just a moment, is my internet connection. Okay, building a strategy for universal healthcare and social protection. So to introduce the organizers first, this is being organized jointly by the NGO-Forum on the ADB, which is an Asian-led network of civil society organizations based in Asia and the Pacific region, who monitor the Asian Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank in order to make them responsible and accountable for the impacts of the projects that they fund. And the Asia-Europe People's Forum, or the AEPF, this is mainly being organized by the Social Justice Cluster of the AEPF. The AEPF is a broad network of dynamic social movements and CSOs, progressive parliamentarians, scholar activists across Asia and Europe, who are working on social, economic, and climate justice, on democratization and human rights. There are various clusters within the AEPF, and the cluster which is primarily organizing this is called the Social Justice Cluster. So to introduce myself, I'm a co-convener of the Social Justice Cluster of the AEPF. I'm also a founder member of the Working People's Charter Alliance, which is a network of informal labor organizations in India. I will be moderating this webinar. So hi. I will also like to introduce our host, Kathy Bernatz of the AEPF. She works with 1111 in Belgium, and she will be the host and help us to organize this webinar. So here we have the speakers. You can see the speakers there. That's I will introduce them when it's time for them to speak, but I'll just do a quick run through. There's Francine Mestrum, Hani Serag, Rayyan Hassan. These are the three main speakers who will take 10 minutes each. And then we have 6 respondents to the speakers who are Nicoletta Dentico, Vidya Dinkar, Kuhn Tetavania, Ana Maria Nemenzo, Chandan Kumar, and Charles Santiago. So I will introduce them when it comes to speak, and the names that I have announced are respondents. It will be in that order. Each respondent will have 3 to 4 minutes to respond. So just a few practical points before we start. As you must have noticed, you can see the main speakers, but you cannot see the participants. And the mics and videos for the participants is disabled. This is a very short webinar, just 1.5 hours. So we will be very short of time. We request you to use the chat box and the Q&A button. The Q&A button is primarily is only for asking questions to the speakers. So then we'll collect them and put it back to them. The speakers will then get a chance to respond to the questions and to the respondents as well. General comments which you would like to make while the entire session is going on at any point, general remarks can be made in the chat box. You can even conduct discussions with each other in the chat box, but please don't use the Q&A button for that. The Q&A button, please keep only for questions which you address to the speakers, and try and mention the name of the speaker so that we know who to direct it to. So at the end, we will, with Kathy's help, we will put the questions to the speakers. So at the end of the webinar, everybody will receive an automatic email with the link to the recorded webinar, so you can even respond afterwards. And since this is a discussion on strategy, we do want to continue this. We will send you a petition at the end of the webinar. We would like to continue it. So, and also, finally, one thing, if you are on Twitter, on social media, we are using the hashtags which Kathy will share with you in the chat box. The hashtags, hashtag AEPF webinars, as well as hashtag COVID-19. Please share the event. And a final point to the speakers, we will send you a message when it is 9.5 minutes so that you know that you have to start to wrap. So for the main speakers, and similarly with the respondents, at 3 minutes you will get a message, after which we would like you to wrap up, because respondents get 3 to 4 minutes in order to speak. Okay, So let's start. I introduce Francine Mestrum. Francine has a PhD in social sciences and works at the European institutions in several Belgian universities. Research concerns the social dimension of globalization, poverty, inequality. She works on social protection, public services, and gender. She's an active member of the International Council of the World Social Forum, and she is helping in the organization of Asia, Europe, People's Forum events. She is also the co-convener of the Social Justice Cluster of the AEPF. She's an author of several books in Dutch, French, and English on development, poverty, inequality, and social commons. She is the founder of the global network called Global Social Justice, and she currently works on a project for social commons. So that's Francine. Francine, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mina, for this very long introduction. Good morning, people in Europe. Good afternoon, people in Asia. I would like to start with a question that at first sight may seem a bit strange, but my question is, are we living in a crisis? And if so, what kind of crisis is this? Because if I look at the financial markets, there is no crisis. Everything is going well. If I look at the real economy, I can see that many companies are going bankrupt because of COVID-19. But I think this is mainly a non-profit making crisis. And when I look at society, I do see a real crisis. Millions of people losing their jobs, formal and informal workers. And you see that in the midst of this pandemic, millions of people have no access to healthcare, no access to minimum income. And add to this, as you can see in the United States today, but not only there is a serious problem of racist police repression and social upheaval. So if there is a crisis, it is a social crisis that necessarily will have to be solved by political measures, democratic and economic and social policies. And at the Social Justice Cluster of the AEPF, we have been doing just that. We are working on social policies with a direct link to the economy and to politics. And I would like to quote here Chris Hani, who was the chairman of the South African Communist Party. And what he said is this: socialism is not about big concepts or heavy theory. It is about decent shelter for those who are homeless. It is about water for those who have no safe drinking water. It is about healthcare. It is about the life of dignity for the old. It is about overcoming the divide between urban and rural areas. And it is about decent education for all. And whether you call this socialism or anything else is totally irrelevant. What it is about is rolling back the tyranny of the markets. And I think this is very, very true and very clear. Now, from this statement, follow two things. One is that the political struggle for these social achievements, these are the things that make another world possible. The current COVID crisis has made it crystal clear how the homeless, the migrants, the asylum seekers, the informal workers, all the vulnerable people in our societies are the major victims of this social crisis. And the wealthy and the rich have more possibilities, far more possibilities to avoid the pandemics. Healthcare should be available to all. It should be affordable. It cannot be a for-profit asset. It means we necessarily have to fight the tyranny of the markets. Healthcare should be taken out totally of the so-called free market. What we need is free, public, universal healthcare, at least if you take human rights seriously. And the awareness of this transformative potential of healthcare and social protection, that is, I think, the first step towards a strategy for system change. The second point is that you cannot fight for healthcare, you cannot fight for water, for shelter, for income, for dignity, if you do not look at the other sectors. You cannot fight for preventive healthcare policies if you do not look at the environment, if you do not look at agricultural policies. Never before has it been so clear that all these different aspects, from healthcare to housing to the environment to the financialization of our lives, have to be tackled simultaneously. And this is, I think, the second major strategic element that has to be taken into account. Now, never before, it seems to me, has it been so clear that politics are about life and death. Healthcare and social protection are not individual concerns. They are in the common interest. It does not help to work for a COVID-free France or Mexico or the Philippines or India if in other countries the illness is still there, if in other countries there is no access to vaccines. So in the same way, the environment knows no borders. We are so interdependent today that it should be clear to all that we are in this together, not in the same boat, but definitely in the same storm. We can only survive if we find solutions for all and for the huge inequalities that today make our societies, I would say, so very difficult to live, if not impossible. Add to this the necessary democratic procedures that we need to implement all these policies. We need participation of all concerned people, men and women, rich and poor, north and south, east and west. And that is why we talk about social commons, policies and achievements that are in the common interest of all and that come about with the help, with the contribution of all. Our social protection then is a very broad concept, and I would like to stress that it is not a corrective mechanism for a failed economic system. On the contrary, it is a tool for change. And I want to stress also that it is very different from other proposals for social protection. And I think here, for instance, of the World Bank, because these institutions only think of markets and they use a discourse on the poor, while in fact they are constantly ignoring the poor. So this is a strategy we have in mind, an awareness of the transformative potential of social protection, an awareness also of the necessary linkages between social, environmental, and economic policies. Obviously, is incomplete. It has to be completed with national strategies, with local strategies, and it can only come about with an educational effort. And again, whether you call this socialism or something else is totally irrelevant. What matters is what you can do for the emancipation of people. And emancipation means liberation of people everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francine. You're well within the time limit. Thank you very much. Now I will call upon Hani Serag. Dr. Serag is a physician, a public health researcher. His previous work includes serving as the global coordinator of the People's Health Movement and as Director of Health Policy and Systems Program of the Association Health and Environmental Association for Health and Environmental Development. Dr. Serag has been involved in a wide range of educational and training activities in both public and global health fields. He has planned, developed curricula for, and taught more than 30 training courses. Most of these courses target public health practitioners, especially from the nonprofit sector, and they focus on health systems, research, and global health. Dr. Serag.
Thank you very much, Nina. And it's quite challenging to follow the talk of Francine. She covered a great deal of things. And just to start saying, talking to you, I'm living right now very near to Houston, and this is the place where George Floyd is from, the black man who was killed in the US a few days ago. And just to comment very briefly on that, this is not just an accident, but the racism is very, very deeply rooted within the US society. And it's not just racism, it's more than that. It is state terrorism and institutional behavior against blacks and people of color. I will try to very, very briefly cover four things: the inequitable impact of COVID-19, the failure of the current structures of global governance for health, the failure of health systems, and lack of absence of social protection, and then what to do. So as Francine said, it's not everybody is impacted by COVID-19. Actually, there are some people are benefiting a lot. And this is just an example. While 40 million people in the US are losing their jobs, the billionaires are accumulating more wealth. And just two of them, the Amazon and Facebook guys, accumulated $63 billion in 10 weeks. So there are still people who are benefiting from people's suffering and people's pains, and we will see very, very shortly a big struggle with big pharmaceutical companies. It started with Gilead, who put their a new drug at $4,500, and they are going to repeat the same story of Hep C. And in Hep C, we all know that they made $11 billion net profit in the first year out of, and prevented lots of people from accessing it. So we will find lots of companies are doing the same thing. Also, talking about inequitable impact here, in the US, the African Americans are heavily impacted. So 54.6 deaths out of each 100,000 in comparison with 22.7 in whites. So if you look at the numbers, it's more than double. This is those who are dying. And if you look here, why this is happening? Because they are more exposed. 75% of health workers are women, so they are more impacted. 60% of those who work in warehouse are delivery workers who are still working right now. They cannot stay home, they cannot work from home. So it is the way that their social class informing their position in the society and what kind of work they have to do. And also people in lower income households, they are more impacted in a very clear way. what kind of failure we have in the current global structure for governance of health. We have leadership crisis. We have financial crisis. We have domination of neoliberalism in shaping the governance for global health. Leadership crisis, it's in both within the structures for governance like WHO and also in member states. We do not have another Haftan Mahler who was the leader of WHO during the declaration of Alma-Ata. We have way weaker leadership within WHO and other international agencies. We have domination of big powers to global structures and private foundation. Gates Foundation is the biggest funder of WHO after US in absolute terms, and 100% of the money is voluntary contribution. So this means that member states can discuss as much as they like, but Mr. Gates will decide what will be funded, what will not be funded at the end, in addition to the US and EU as well. So the US in the last, just one example, in the 73rd WHA, the US and UK made lots of pushes against the global patent pool for COVID-19 drugs. So this means that these big powers are cutting the road to have any potential drugs or vaccines available for everybody. They don't want that. They want to continue making profit out of it. The problem in health system, I see there is a lack or absence of preparedness plans, and this is at all levels, at global, at national, and local levels. Weak surveillance and monitoring systems for pandemics. Also, we have weak pandemic management, including timely, accurate, and adequate information. We have shortage in healthcare workers, and here in the US, it's a huge problem, but also in the other country I'm belonging to, which is Egypt, we are suffering from the shortage in healthcare workers, especially in this time. In addition to all of that, we have domination of profit-making health facilities. Universal health care, and here I will talk more or less from the point of view of People's Health Movement, which I'm a part of it. We are calling for public financing and public provision. And I emphasize this is very much. So we are not talking about just single payer, which I personally say that it can be a big problem, not a solution, because single payer means that we can collect all the money together in one pile and then to subsidize the corporates. If we continue to have the provision and the production of medical devices and pharmaceuticals from the private sector. So here we emphasize both public finance, public provision. So, and financing, even if it's public, it needs to be progressive. So it takes more money from the rich. And this means it needs to be tax-based in a progressive system. We need universality and comprehensiveness. So it's not a minimum package for the poor, as has been offered by World Bank for quite a long time, and we need everybody to be a part of the system. We need the system to be able to address social determinants of health. We need decentralization, but again, not as the World Bank is talking about. We need decentralization, means priorities should be identified at local level. We need good governance. How to do that? We need to start at country level to support activism at national and local levels. We need to build a platform for solidarity and exchanging experience. And we need to be proactively participating in debates at global level. We need to advocate for democratic global governance for health and build capacity for health activism. So at the end, the change is not going to happen via non-democratic global governance bodies or governments. It will start from people, and I would add, start from street. And I hope that what's going on in the US right now will lead to any desired change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hani, for bringing out what we have to do about making universal health possible and talking about what the PHM is doing. Because as I said in the beginning, we do hope that this conversation will actually lead to a collective strategizing so that we can do something about this at a global level, build a global solidarity and perhaps a campaign about which we will speak at the end. And now I would like to go to the next speaker, who is Rayyan Hassan. Rayyan works with the NGO-Forum on the ADB. Rayyan is a Bangladeshi national, and he is the current executive director of the NGO-Forum on the ADB. He has a background in environmental studies and a master's in social change and development. He is currently pursuing a doctorate in political science as he oversees the Forum network and its campaigns. As a civil society advocate, he regularly engages policymakers in the ADB and the AIIB, the banks, and their major shareholders, bringing community issues to the forefront of the development debate. Rayyan.
Thank you. Those were very, very powerful and interesting presentations by the previous speakers, and I hope that I can add some more food for thought for our strategy discussion later on. So the focus of my input would be looking at transforming development finance amid this COVID-19 conversation. And some of the themes that I will be touching upon are COVID-19's economic impact, the issue of debt, the role of international financial institutions such as the ADB and AIIB, slightly looking at China and the Belt Road Initiative, are things changing there, and some thoughts on future trends. So one thing is for certain, there's a public outcry echoing around the world from panic-stricken hospitals of Italy, New York, Philippines, Bangladesh. Doctors and frontline workers were ill-equipped and infections were soaring, and many, many people were being denied healthcare due to lack of facilities. And this was a global scenario. The other common theme which we have been noticing is struggling with fiscal health and lack of public health infrastructure. Governments, especially in Asia, are opting to use heavy-handed method of police and military crackdowns to enforce quarantine protocols, thus violating human rights and basic political freedoms. Philippines, among many others, are being persecuted, silenced, or jailed for speaking the truth. And I've heard of recently that activists in Bangladesh are also facing the same persecution, exposing government failures. On the issue of unemployment, Hani was very articulate on that front. I'm echoing the same sentiments. Recent ILO reports suggest 85% of the global workforce has been hit because of full and partial lockdowns, of which 125 million full-time workers are from Asia alone. A question of lack of economic diversification. Whether it was due to poor planning, we don't know, or lack of political will, many lower income Asian governments who have not diversified their economies for decades have suffered more because of the lockdowns. Some examples of this are, for example, tourism in Nepal, overseas migrant worker flows for the Philippines, ready-made garment sector in Cambodia, Bangladesh, Vietnam. These are all in deep crisis for closing of European and US markets and the shutting down of air travel. People are talking about debt, and World Bank experts in a recent report on the global waves of debt are saying, are we in the fourth wave of debt? The global debt as of September 2019 stands at $263 trillion. And this is the highest it has ever been. It boils down to $32,500 US for each individual of 7.5 billion people inhabiting planet Earth. Speaking from an Asian perspective, that means $32,500 will affect an individual quite differently based on where their livelihood is located. So if they're a construction worker or a teacher or a farmer or even a CEO, $32,500 will have a different kind of an impact. So what we are facing in terms of impact of debt on the working class is there is a major depreciation of local currencies because of the slowing down of the global economy. There's a stagnation of wages. A lot of people, especially day workers, are not getting paid, and there are no safety nets. There is a rising of prices of housing, of food and medicine and healthcare. In some cases, like I'm from Bangladesh, one statistic haunts me. There is 0.8 hospital beds for every 1,000 people. So that shows you the level of gap that we have in terms of healthcare infrastructure. So what ends up happening is because of the rising prices and lack of wages, people are forced to take up multiple jobs in absolutely pitiful conditions to make ends meet. So unending working hours and poor living conditions prior to the pandemic already put people further to risk of getting infected. There is unfortunately never a good time to be hit by a pandemic, and this is possibly the worst of times from a global historical debt perspective. So we can always ask the question, what were we busy doing as governments? And the answer to that was we were busy looking to billions and trillions of dollars in infrastructure loans. According to the IMF, the debt was triggered because of low interest rates and loose financial conditions over the past decade. 2010, global finance was heralding the mega infrastructure asset class boom. We heard this from World Bank's former president Jim Kim in 2017 of turning billions to trillions in infrastructure through the maximizing financing for development agenda. We saw China's Belt Road Initiative launched in 2013. We heard the former president of the ADB, Nakao, in the 2015 annual governors meeting in Azerbaijan, Baku, that there was a $27 trillion infrastructure gap in Asia. So Asian governments knew that there was financing available and a large amount of credit available in infrastructure, and their knee-jerk reaction was to accept all the loans very, very quickly. The problem is no one could predict that in 2019, a viral pandemic would just shut down the global economy. And immediate loan repayments would become life-threatening for lower income countries, especially single sector, export-oriented, coupled to that kind of an industry government, say, for example, Bangladesh with ready-made garments. So that is the international scenario over which lower income economies find themselves. Now, deep inside the economy, if we point a flashlight there, we will see some structural weaknesses which has always been there in governments, financial systems. These include poor revenue collection, widespread tax evasion by big corporations, both national and multinational. Monetary financing in the form of international loans was used to support fiscal deficits in the government's own budget without fulfilling the project outcomes. Corruption in food warehouses and stockpiling. We have seen governments, in order to be populist, decide to subsidize fossil fuel industry, which was usually in private sector hands. So there was a lot of bad policies and bad fiscal management, which made the issue a further deeper impact in terms of debt. And these issues are not only isolated to Asia. I think Africa, Latin America, the MENA region, even countries in Europe have faced these same problems of weak financial systems. So what ended up happening is when these large infrastructure development international loans came in, and these are all public finance, right? These are taxpayers' money from wealthy countries of the G20. So international development public finance was transferred to private closed hands in lower income countries. So the objective of public finance, as Hani said, to go towards public interest was not happening. So what you end up seeing is a lot of wealth bubbles where you do not see real progressive use of public finance. So what ends up happening as a knee-jerk reaction for lower income countries, and we are seeing this everywhere, that while virus and infection rates are still rising, governments are now forced to reopen and restart their economies because they have to pay back. They have to pay back. The economies are collapsing. They have to restart the economy. Whether they're risking the people on the second wave of the flare-up is of secondary importance. So these are pretty grim times. So what was the focus of these big mega infrastructure financing loans? We saw on the ADB portfolio that there were gas pipelines in Azerbaijan. There were export processing zone loans for Myanmar. There were massive investments in transboundary road projects for Central Asia, South Asia. Now, what was left neglected was the small-scale road which links the village to the nearest hospital, because back then it was deemed as a non-bankable and a non-profitable investment. So what we are seeing with COVID-19 is decades of neglect in public health infrastructure and social protection by governments globally, and we've all been caught off guard. So just for a case example, let's look at this ADB $20 billion COVID loan, which was approved by the bank in April 13. I won't go into too many details on that, but $2.2 billion of that 20 billion has been earmarked for private sector alone, with no details on how that will be unpacked. There are some provisions there for procuring healthcare materials and technology. There are provisions for capacity building of governments around healthcare investments, but just to quote the ADB, there are two primary objectives which worry the NGO-Forum. One is providing select private firms, microfinance institutions, small and medium enterprises with access to working capital. So it's trying to keep alive the neoliberal economic system which is already in place. The second is addressing the pandemic's economic and financial impact. Once again, a multilateral development bank is showing that it doesn't have a development agenda in terms of COVID-19 recovery, and we should all be mindful of how that money will be spent and used later on. Moving out of the ADB circuit, let's look at the very popular China's Belt Road Initiative and how it was faring up with COVID-19. Work has stopped. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is currently stalled. I think Farooq Bhai is here from Pakistan, Saeed Baloch is here from Pakistan. They can probably add more details on this, but there is no construction going on in the CPEC. Cambodia's Special Economic Zone, which fell under a BRI loan, that's also stalled. The Pyra coal power plant in Bangladesh is stalled. Projects across Indonesia, Malaysia, and Myanmar have also been stalled indefinitely. One of the reasons why it has been stalled is because of the lack of travel facilities for Chinese laborers. Because the Belt Road was very sure that you have to use Chinese laborers and you have to use Chinese materials and technology in these projects. Now, with thousands of Chinese workers unable to return to the Belt Road project site, this means that all these projects are remaining stalled while the governments are now pretty much accruing debt and interest for the loans that they have taken. A media report in India suggests that 130 countries have placed travel restrictions on the entry of Chinese citizens. And this is not going to be lifted anytime soon because of the nature of the pandemic. A second wave might impose more travel bans, leading to the cost of the loan rising every day. So what did China do? And if you notice this in the newspapers, China is trying to revamp the Belt Road very much, and it is starting to move to a direction which a media report in the New York Times said the new health Silk Road. So Chinese government is now providing a wave of medical aid to Malaysia, to the Philippines and Greece. The Chinese embassies are the key focal point institutions negotiating with governments on easing medical supply chains, etc., etc. Private sector from China has also stepped in medical supplies like Huawei and the China Communications Construction Company. Alibaba Foundation, as you have all heard, has delivered relief packages to Uganda, to Ukraine, to the United States. There were also some emergency loan support and concessionary lending bilateral to some countries as well. One of the examples is the recent $500 million loan approved to Sri Lanka. So, looking at the multilateral investment arm of China within the Belt Road framework, which is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which we regularly monitor and engage, they have also set up another $5 to $10 billion COVID-19 crisis recovery fund. The bank has already announced two significant projects, one for Beijing, the other for Chongqing. and they've earmarked $10 billion just for investments inside China alone. Other approved loans as of last month include Indonesia, Bangladesh, and India, and these are all COVID framing loans. So what we are noticing is traditional infrastructure loans from both the ADB and the AIIB are starting to slow down in getting approval, but you're starting to see larger amounts of money being allocated to COVID-19 loans. Now, we might need to unpack that a little further down the road. So when it comes to debt relief, you guys probably have been aware that the G20 and the IMF has considered debt relief for some 29 countries, but it only comes up to only $250 million. And if you consider the debt scenario, this is clearly not enough. I think it's more of a lip service than a meaningful gesture towards debt relief. None of the multilateral development banks have stopped charging debt payments for 2020, be it the World Bank, be it JICA, be it ADB, AIIB, or the BRICS. So we pretty much are in this scenario where governments are forced to meet their debt payments, and in order to do so, for many other reasons, they have to restart their economies amid the threat of COVID-19. So I've come to almost the end of my intervention here, but I'll just conclude with getting your attention to 4 particular points, which I think are the future trends towards development finance, and something which should possibly of interest for people who are monitoring development finance in COVID-19 right now. The first one is, as I said earlier, traditional infrastructure loans by MDBs are quickly transforming to COVID-19 loans. This is because traditional infrastructure projects and to build projects is going to be very, very challenging. The threat of infection is there. Governments will want to hold on to hard US dollar loans instead of spending it. So there are many reasons why a project might not necessarily fly through. Now, as a bank, my job is to give you loans and charge you interest in order to make profit. And it seems a COVID-19 health loan without major infrastructure to be built around it is an easier loan to push through, and it's a much financially less risky investment in a borrowing government. Second,
Rayyan, I think you're getting out of time, so you'll have to wrap up very quickly. Thank you.
I'll just go very quickly. Just the last point, I guess. Governments must be vigilant that the future development finance pathway addresses the long-term healthcare and social protection of the people. And they just don't sign on loans and jeopardize the financial future of everyone. I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rayyan. I'm sorry to have stopped you, but we have so many people, as you know. Yeah, so thank you for that. That was very illuminating and very instructive. I would like to request the panelists to, the participants to please send questions. I'm sure you have questions. Some of you are asking questions in the chat box. Please make your comments and questions in the Q&A box so that it's easy for us to put it back to the panelists, because now you've heard the main panelists, and these are the questions which the later speakers are going to respond on. So we would like to hear your responses. We're sorry we can't hear you. We don't have audio for the participants, but we do want to hear what you have to say, what you have to ask. It's not just questions. Please, your comments, your suggestions, please use the Q&A box, because we really want to hear from you, right? So now we have the respondents. I will start with Nicoletta. Nicoletta Dentico is an activist journalist with a long-standing experience in international cooperation and global health. She coordinated the Italian campaign to ban landmines, and later as General Director of MSF Italy, she became actively involved in the launch and development of the MSF Access to Essential Medicines campaign. She was Policy Director at Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative in Geneva, and later consultant for the World Health Organization. She is currently lead of the Global Health Program in Society for International Development. She has co-authored several books, mainly on health and globalization. Over to Nicoletta.
Thank you very much, Mina. And thank you for inviting me in this very interesting conversation. I really would like to echo what your appeal at the beginning. This is a discussion, but there will have to be some strategizing and continuation, because the issues that are being put in line and put on the table are too important and too relevant at the moment to abandon after a webinar. And we're all engaged, so we really needed to transform the webinar into collective action. I really want to thank the three speakers. They have laid the ground in a very comprehensive way. What I would like to say, I mean, just very briefly, some sort of headlines. I think Francine mentioned it very clearly, and I want to echo that and strengthen that point, that one of the most crucial lessons of COVID-19, on top of the things that have been said already, is the interconnectedness of things. We are, have lived over the last 4 decades about silos thinking, silos policing, micro-policing, and trying really to adjust and to introduce corrective mechanisms, micro-corrective mechanisms, calling them in a rather sort of rhetorical way important transformative actions. Nothing of that, because the system, which is the basic neoliberal system, or rather post-liberal system. I think, we should imagine that, in fact, some sort of liberal thinking was at the building block of the post-war policies in Europe, at least, which created some sort of common social commons that were dismantled lately. So I think we should really look at a post-liberal ideology that is still very pervasively dominating, even in the solution that are now being proposed with some sort of green adjectives around, but it's still basically the free market giving the solution. So now the interconnection between things and how the society is global and how things need to be addressed globally, I think is becoming so much clearer. And this is real life. And this also entails impacts very much on the health discourse. I'm sure that Hani will agree with me when we have suffered, when I say that we have suffered over the last decades, at least 3 decades, when the World Bank started to talk and define the burden of diseases, which was the economic burden of diseases, and that was the transformation of health from being the key to the practicability of democracy in countries, using health as a door to open up to a democratic exercise, and to the idea, the notion that people's rights were feasible with national planning and national policies. And the WHO should be actually not one institutions giving recommendations, but it should be with the, for example, policies of the 70s, it should be the institutions giving instruments for governments to use in their national policies and national planning. All of that has been totally killed, has totally been dismantled. And we have lived 3 decades of the discourse divided upon diseases. So I hope that we are not replicating that format now with COVID, and I'm a little bit worried when I see that even civil society actors have been shaped and tailored according to this disease discourse, which is really very limited and very functional to a marketization of health. The second point that I think it's an important lesson from COVID-19, for which it comes as a blessing in a way, it's a paradoxical blessing, is the relationship between the public sector and the private sector. Of course, we are also coming out of decades of deregulation with the private sector, which is by the World Bank still used and promoted as the key driver for the Sustainable Development Goals. We have to privatize everything in order to achieve these presumed sustainability. Of course, COVID-19 tells us that, one, if you don't make social investments, if you don't invest in social policies, people die. Two, that actually the private sector is pretty useless when it comes to this kind of situations. And therefore, there is a need for the revamping of the role of the public sector to be used in order to regulate the private sector. And if, as Hani was saying, the private sector is to be used for whatever purpose, it has to be within the scheme and the framework of a driving public sector and a driving public finance. So, of course, we don't want to have a statalist view of the role of the state, but there must be a very important regaining, reconquering, reclaiming of the public function, the public financing, and the public role. I think, finally, because the time is short, that the third lesson of the COVID-19 is that we're talking about health. Of course, we have a health crisis, we have an economic and social crisis, but we have, again, the financial agenda that must be focused again, because at the end of the day, this has a lot to do. The COVID-19 is kind of, a luminol, this kind of liquid that allows you to detect blood in a crime scene, and the blood, it's a symptom of the capital flows that are free riding across the space with no time and no space, even in the lockdown crisis. And Hani provided the outcome of what it means, the capital flows completely free riding. The if we don't want to transform COVID-19 in yet another opportunity for widening inequalities and widening the injustice, the structural injustice in this world, we really need now to take measures to control finance, to have binding agreements for the role of the economic actors vis-a-vis the human rights. So we needed to recover this concept of the binding treaty to regulate the work, the activities of economic actors. And so COVID-19 calls us once again, and for good, because I don't think we have another chance, for regulations, for coming back to rules of the game. The new normality imposes new norms. And this, of course, impacts on finance, impacts on economic actors, impacts on the trade rules. I'm really I see with some sort of bitterness how civil society organizations in the Access to Medicines campaign are not enough taking the opportunity of this turn to ask for new rules of the game in the WTO. I mean, it's really unbearable to see the situation.
Nicolette, I'm sorry, you're
okay. I made my point. Sorry. So I thank you very much, Mina. Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I carried away. I'm sorry.
I've been given a job, so I have to do it. Right?
It's okay. My messages are got across. No problem.
Yeah. Yes, wonderful. And I love the way you talked about the interconnectedness of things. It reminds me of my old Marxist study classes. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to request the panelists to look at the question and answer box yourself, because Kathy and I are unable to get the questions out and send it to you. So please check the question and answer box for any questions you might want to deal with. There are some questions in the chat box as well. So maybe Kathy can also put that into the question box so that you can look at those questions. There are comments also which have been coming. So great. So over to Vidya now, and I will introduce Vidya. Vidya Dinkar is an activist based in the south of India. She is president of INSAF, Indian Social Action Forum, which is a platform of 740 grassroots groups and CSOs. Her areas of concern and engagement are corporate land grab, the energy and climate crises, and the politics of hate and exclusion. These are some of the issues that she has been working on. Vidya?
Thanks, Meena. I'd first like to respond to the entire thing as something that, of course, the powers that be look at rebuilding what we already have only bigger, better. And this, of course, is the problem. It's basically an opportunity, most of us think, to actually rethink and revisit and deconstruct what we already have. That, of course, is something that the government is not yet thinking. There was this example of a young girl, 15-year-old, who cycled 12,000 kilometers carrying her sick father home because she'd promised her mother so. Somebody who was unemployed because of COVID-19, and everyone sort of started treating it as a triumph of endurance and love. And people went and gave her a new cycle, a shiny new cycle. So this is the way we've been looking at the pandemic, and our response has been so ludicrous, really. And that we're not thinking this through. So we've had people dying on hot trains because there's been no food or water. And the trains themselves came after 45 days. So there's a real disconnect between the people and the working class and the government and the powers that be. Our government's economic stimulus or revival package has been focused in the wrong direction. And really, the government in India, and Chandan might also tell you that they used sort of fear and force to enforce first the lockdown. Okay, there was no taking the people into confidence. There were grand shows, there was posturing, but no real connect with the people. And this, I think, is really worrisome, that even 2 months later, we are still where we first began, that there's no taking of the people into confidence, and there's a real trust deficit among the marginalized community and the government that is supposed to be there for them, that is supposed to ensure social protection. There's no explanation, there's no logic given as to why this lockdown, what are we planning ahead, etc. So this fear really doesn't do well. For example, we've heard of other countries. Iceland would call up everybody who was beyond 60 and really reassure them on the phone. Nothing like that has happened in our country, and they actually looked at the figures, and people had died more in non-COVID times than in COVID times in that country. And can you imagine what is happening in other countries that have this great disconnect with its people? So really, this is a virus that has turned into a tool of subjugation and authoritarianism in the hands of some governments. And this is something that we must question. Interestingly, it is, in India at least, it is civil society and individuals who came up first, even before the government, and reached out to ordinary citizens in distress, stranded in larger cities because they were working there far away from their homes. And, well, we were allowed to help. But we could not question, we could not criticize, we could not ask the government too much as to why they hadn't put systems in place to reach out to everyone. So this has become a virus of hate against the minorities in my country, against the marginalized. And this is something that I really don't know how we can begin to dismantle. But it's also an opportunity to fashion, for example, a new public distribution system. We had always been talking about how our public distribution system, which ensures some essentials and some nutrition to workers and vulnerable communities, is sort of geographic specific. So if you have what you call a ration card in one area, you cannot access those rations in another area. And most workers are those who are living in big cities far away from where their ration cards can get them food. And this is what we saw exposed during the pandemic. The pandemic really exposed all the lacuna, all the problems in our system, and hit us all in the face much more than before. Many Indians, especially urban Indians, thought we're doing pretty well. We've come a long way. There's super specialty hospitals. There are great colleges. Everyone has a mobile phone, and suddenly the whole thing is exposed and the naked truth is before us to now respond to. World Bank put in 1 billion USD right away. The ADB came in with 1.5 billion USD in that project that they call CARES. The AIIB also came in and said, we'll put in up to 750 million. And this is all supposed to be for social security, for the marginalized, for affected workers. But we have not seen that money being put to good use for workers who have been really distressed. We have not seen the government be sort of generous with the amounts that they had. The money is still in control of the government. The information is in the government's control, and even local governments or government officials that want to help in this kind of dire situation, because they are in touch with people, they see what is happening before them. I've seen policemen and people who work in the labor department actually pay for people who cannot go home. So there's been an individual response, but the government's sharing of resources to where it really matters has been really, really poor. And that is why we have this system. I guess it's a time also to think of how we can have more labor-intensive and not climate, challenging economies that are built up in smaller areas and where they are. Because, for example, when some of the workers went home and sent me pictures of their hometown, I was like, this is paradise. Why would you even think of leaving that? But obviously there are so many push and pull factors that the government and all of us, the people, need to sit together and discuss how we can change this around. I'm not sure the government is really interested in looking at this as an opportunity, but we somehow need to force them to do that. And that is the task before us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vidya. That's very useful from a country where, the world has been seeing these pictures of millions and millions of people on foot on the highways. It shocked the conscience, just not of the country, but of the world, I think. Again, I would like to request all the participants to please post your questions, not in the chat box, but in the question and answer box. Else I will have to get Kathy's help in order to send it to the panelists, because there's no other way that we can communicate your questions to the panelists. It's really hard to go through the entire chat box in order to find your question. Yes. So now I will call upon Koen. Koen de Tavernier is in Belgium. He's a Master of Philosophy. He was formerly working at the Belgium Coalition of Development NGOs in 11 with work on development cooperation and coordination. He was also doing the coordination of advocacy for the joint Belgian campaign on social protection for all. Now he is with the World Solidarity Movement as an advocacy officer, specializing in social protection and offering policy support to multi-stakeholder Asia network on the right to social protection. World Solidarity mainly works with social movements that pursue decent work, social protection, and job creation for all workers. Koen, you have 4 minutes.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. My first point I wanted to make was to make a link with decent work. Of course, it's an ILO concept, it's an agenda with different pillars, but it also brings me to one of the questions I saw in the Q&A box on whether some countries are actually choosing between livelihood and life. I think where freedom of association is guaranteed, where workers are allowed to unite and to claim safe working circumstances, this should not always be in opposition. To give one example, I won't brag about Belgium. We did good on certain aspects during this pandemic, but very bad on others. But one example is, for example, there have been serious outbreaks of the virus in meat processing factories in Germany and the Netherlands, because they are very badly regulated, and people are being paid poor salaries. And the sector has been whining and in Belgium that it's unfair competition because our government is imposing stricter rules on safety at work. Well, so far, let's hope it won't. So far in that sector, nothing bad, nothing really exceptionally bad happened as compared to our two neighboring countries. Because of stricter rules and stricter regulations, because of a stronger position, I think, of trade unions who are allowed to bargain and negotiate and defend the right to work in safer circumstances. So to me, this is linked. It's also linked to the fact that in many countries, when workers lose their jobs or can only work fewer hours, they are not protected with a decent unemployment insurance system. Yeah. So all this is together a broad agenda of decent work, of which social protection is, of course, a major part. Now, coming to that, I think this crisis can be an opportunity for the broader civil society, for the broader workers' movement, because no neoliberal or post-liberal can claim that their recipes or their answers to challenges or to guarantee people's right to social protection or in any way sufficient or can do. Yeah, the World Bank has been mentioned with their minimalistic universal social assistance approach. We do know more is needed. This is not about handouts. This is not about food packages. This is not a short-term, geographically located crisis. This is global. This is long-lasting. So this means that it's quite clear, and this crisis has made overwhelmingly clear that more structural, long-term solutions are needed. And for us in our work, social protection, as was already mentioned by Francine. For us, it's a key part of the solution. Yeah. Many other things that have been mentioned, I fully agree, of course, with, but that's for us. So with our focus on the decent work and on social protection, for us it's key. So more is needed than these minimalistic approaches. Structural systems have to be implemented. I see there is an opportunity, but only where, let's say, the broader workers' movement, civil society, classic trade unions, together with social movements, bringing together unorganized workers in the informal economy in different sectors. Only where civil society is united, I think this momentum there will be a chance to grasp it, to do something with it, and to achieve a change. This bringing me to compare the focus on these structural measures, these systems of social protection, the need for a strong health system. This is, for example, also reflected by the approach in development cooperation. Yeah? We are also a development NGO in the more classic sense. The past 10 years, money spent by both the EU and Belgian government in their development cooperation for emergency relief has tripled in 3 times. The money spent on health system strengthening, the money spent on decent work in general and on social protection in more particular, this has decreased by 20%. So the focus shifts to emergency relief, to short-term solutions. This is also, I think, linked to some of the other elements some of the speakers already mentioned. Also in the thinking on how to cooperate internationally, our governments have a very narrow view, and they are narrowing down their view. They don't invest in health systems. They invest in emergency relief, and in health they invest in vaccination campaigns, and of course these are very important. But the tougher challenge to assist countries in strengthening the health system overall, the infrastructure, the personnel, the equipment, the ventilators, the whole system that needs to be there to cope with the pandemic we see now, but also with other still ongoing long-term health challenges. it doesn't get the focus it deserves, and it gets less attention than it used to get. So also there for us, it's important in our advocacies and in Belgium to really reverse this trend and put the priorities back where they need to be. On another question I saw in the Q&A on relief and recovery, there too, I think that civil society united and combined should, of course, there's an urgency, and many organizations step in and do the best they can to save lives, and it's unfortunate, but it's necessary. Yeah. It also points at the very important role of civil society in all this. States, as I said by Vidya, I think there is a disconnect with people. In between state and people, you have civil society, you have social movements that do reach the people, that do reach the more vulnerable, the more precarious people and workers. So even in a recovery, I see a clear role for civil society, for social movements, and not only now in the urgency, but already now start thinking about concrete proposals, because the momentum is there, to make policy changes on the national level. And I would leave it to this. I think for me, this is the key message I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Koen. Thank you very much. I will immediately go on to the next speaker, who is Ana Maria Namenzo, who is a feminist and a socio-political activist, a founder of Women Health in Philippines, a pioneer advocate of women's reproductive health in the Philippines, with long-time involvement in women's rights, health, sovereignty, and social justice movements. She is the lead convener of Dignidad, which is a coalition that campaigns for a life of dignity for all Filipinos. Ana Maria, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I have titled my talk as The Quest for Universal Health Care and Comprehensive, which we also say is a campaign for a life of dignity for all Filipinos. I am going to talk a bit about, how we built up a health movement in the Philippines. For years, people's organizations, networks, and social movements representing basic sectors of workers, informal and rural workers, peasants, human rights defenders, children and youth, older persons, persons with disabilities, development NGOs, health groups, and advocates have been coming together to carry out coordinated actions and campaigns around issues of social justice and human rights, such as decent work and living wage, land rights and agrarian reform, sustainable livelihood, freedom from burdensome and illegitimate debts, social pensions, cheaper medicines, universal health care, food sovereignty, people-centered development, and ecological justice. Years of advocacy and campaigns have developed a deeper understanding of people of the interconnectedness of all these issues that are based on the universality of human rights, enabling a more holistic perspective and respect for human life and the bounties of nature that sustain life and our stewardship role in our home planet Earth. Prior to the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, various groups in the Philippines pushed for the cheaper medicines law to stem the overwhelming dominance of pharmaceutical companies that pushed the cost of medicines to about 60% of out-of-pocket expenses of individuals. As if these were not enough, the cost of healthcare is largely borne by individuals in a country where about 1/3 of the population live in poverty. In that same cheaper medicines law, we reiterated the policy enshrined in our constitution that public health is a national priority. An overriding concern when we engage in managing our international obligations, particularly with regard to the WTO. The aggressive intrusion of neoliberal policies of trade liberalization, deregulation, and privatization in our economic life have been exposed and resisted by social movements and people's organizations. One particular concern for the growing health movement was the way Western countries have actively negotiated regional and bilateral agreements with developing countries containing provisions schemingly preserve and or expand these IPR's intellectual property rights involving patent rights of pharma companies. Naturally, our groups watch out for these FTAs and monitor them, even as we hold dialogues with the Department of Trade and Industry to air and argue our concerns. Oftentimes, negotiations and draft agreements are kept out of the public eye, but we always assert our right to information. We not only campaign for concrete health programs, but worry too about how they are to be funded. The health cluster of the Alternative Budget Initiative of Social Watch Philippines has mobilized multi-sectoral groups to present health measures people need and want to the Department of Health, ending up on many occasions supporting the health budget of the department and lobbying for this with members of both houses of Congress. The health movement began to take up the issue of universal health care, talking with health experts, holding discussions and learning sessions, and mining our own experiences. We realized that health is not only about improving how to deal with diseases, but also addressing the full range of physical, mental, social, and environmental conditions that affect a person's health. In other words, the social determinants of health. Some experts say that health measures may take only 20% of total health care, but the larger effort, 80%, goes into improving the economic and social conditions of life. As we stated in one of our documents, quote, these include the conditions in which a person is born, grows, lives, works, and ages in, and the wider set of forces and systems shaping the conditions of daily life, such as the distribution of money at global, national, and local levels. These are precisely the conditions that give rise to inequality and the disproportionate opportunities and benefits the rich and poor receive. The earlier slogan that we adopted for universal health care of whoever, whenever, wherever it is needed, expanded into a campaign for a right to life of dignity for all Filipinos. The campaign led by Dignidad Coalition tied up many disparate issues into a call for universal, comprehensive, rights-based, and legislative, slowly building partnerships and progressive social movements in the Asian region, as well as those in Europe. We have come together to encourage, learn from, and inspire each other, and work for public and services that we all hold as the commons, that we all work for, manage, and protect so that collectively we can all share and enjoy. Then the COVID-19 virus
Excuse me,
struck
I think
and
that
spread like wildfire.
Anna Maria, I
Yes?
think you may not want to start a new subject because you're out of time. You're very much out of time. I'm so sorry.
Just a minute more. Yeah. Oh, am I? Well,
So could you wrap up?
Okay. The reason I talked about, how we have organized the movement is to show that we're not starting from scratch. That we need to build on these movements that we have started. And that even when the COVID-19 virus struck and spread like wildfire, pandemic all over the world, everything stood still because we followed the WHO guidelines of containment, quarantine, social distancing, and all the health protocol of washing hands with soap and water and so on. But this also exposed the inequalities between the rich and the poor, those with resources and those who not. And we all know that the marginalized ones, the ones who suffered most, are the poorer sections of the population. So now we face, now that we're so slowly coming out of the quarantine mode, we have to address the vital needs of the poor and the marginalized sectors. That's why a survival program, because we have to make sure that money is put in people's hands, that they are able to work, that they have good working conditions, they have food to eat. So this is how we build the economy that is a caring economy that will put people first, that will activate, economic and social life, but always people at the center of development. The strategies that we have engaged in the past.
Time.
Yes, but I want to end up, with, well, we all know we can have all these programs, but we have to build new framework, for development. And naturally, it will always have to be where business and corporate interests do not play a role. That we always say the slogan of people over profit must prevail. But in addressing this particular pandemic problem that we have, there's now a movement, for a people's vaccine. And I think this is the time that we can all work for global social solidarity. A people's vaccine, one that will be made available to anybody all over the world who needs it. Because as we have said, this is now being initiated by Oxfam as well as the Médecins Sans Frontières. No one is safe until we are all safe. So we're building a mass support, and I hope this will gather that corporations, pharma companies do not earn profit and cost people's lives. So we need to establish this global social solidarity and work for the commons that benefit all of us.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so sorry that I had to rush you. You are speaking from years and years and years of experience, but unfortunately we are so short of time. I think we might be a bit short of time for responding from the speakers. Perhaps the speakers can respond on email, because I don't think there will be time for responses from the speakers. I'm really, really sorry. So we will just go to the next person. That's Chandan. I'd like to introduce Chandan. He's my colleague. Chandan is a labor activist. He is a national coordinator of the Working People's Charter, which is a network of over 100 organizations organizing workers in the informal economy in India. He's co-convener of the National Campaign Committee for the Eradication of Bonded Labor, which is an organization of 50 organizations working to eliminate forced labor in the informal sector in India. He's also an executive committee member. He's active in the Rashtriya Hamal Panchayat, which is a national trade union working with informal sector workers. He sits on the minimum advisory board or minimum wage advisory board of the Government of India and the core committee of the National Human Rights Commission. He has served in various human rights and various government bodies, and there seems to be some disturbance. Okay, so you go, Chandan.
So how much time do you have, Meena, for this?
Just 4 minutes, Chandan.
Okay,
sorry.
I'll try to finish it up as soon as possible.
Yes,
so I'm also facing some electricity problem because we had a landfall of cyclone Nisarga yesterday, so there's no electricity at all. So I hope if I get disconnected, I think my fellow speakers will get more time. So anyway, I think Vidya has already covered a lot of points, but I would like to mention some very specific points what we are talking about here in India. I think today is the 68th day we have been working on ground, and the kind of situation we are seeing on the ground across the country is unimaginable and unspeakable. So I agree with what Francine said in the beginning. Also, Rayyan talked about the whole urgency to talk about public health, talk about social protection and states' accountability in ensuring the social security rights largely. In India, presently, the kind of situation we are seeing right now, I mean, the entire world is watching, all the newspapers are absolutely, writing about it. And to name few, I mean, you see that the trains are going back to the source areas where workers live. And when the train stops at the main destination, there are dead bodies inside the trains. And there's no state authority to count those bodies. And the government responded 2 days ago in the Supreme Court of India that the 80 dead bodies we have found it to the Rapid Railway Protection Forces. There are people who are walking on the railway tracks and getting killed by the running trains. And the government is saying, government is saying to the Supreme Court that what will happen if the people walking on the railway tracks. The same situation, the small child, trying to pull up his mother, and the mother is already dead on the railway station. So that's the kind of situation we are seeing in India right now across the country. People are just throwing out from their houses because they have not been able to pay the rent. The private hospitals are shut down. They're not being able to functional, despite many orders by the government that please make it functional, please receive the patients. And we see that in absence of the public health system, there's a complete collapse of the public health system in India. It's like health emergency. There is no wages paid to the workers, despite the government order, please pay the minimum wages, and there's no payment of wages, and therefore workers have no employment, no wages at all. And then on top of it, when the workers are walking on the street, there's a police brutality very openly. So here we are in the situation, and we don't know from where to start and what to do. I'm not saying the government have not taken any initiative. They have taken some initiative. They announced it, as Rayyan and also Vidya said, that the $1 billion commitment by the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, yet there is no clarity about how this policy is going to, provide any support or any benefit to these workers. And give you a small example. Almost 200 million people are not even registered. So government have no data. Who are these workers? Where are they come from? Which sectors they work in? What kind of wages they have? Where are their accommodations? So government have no clue about almost 200 million people. And therefore, even though government wants to basically contribute, they want to give the cash support or the income support to these workers, and they don't have any details, no bank account, no registration at all. So this is the situation we are in right now. And we are trying to basically address this question by solving the food security problem. We have been distributing, we have reached out to over 200,000 workers across the country. We try to provide them the food security issues. We also negotiated with large number of employers to talk about and immediately release the wage payments and so on. But yet the situation that we're in right now, there's a very handful of people are working on the ground, because large number of, I'm just giving a kind of very positive reflection, the large number of people and also a lot of progressive movement not working on the ground. I think many of the people just, kind of in the house, and they are very afraid to come on the street because of the corona pandemic. So I would quote like what workers said, and that become the national story, that we are more afraid to die from the hunger instead of corona pandemic. And that's the situation here in India right now, that many of the people who died, over hundreds of people died in the last few days, is all died because of the lot of accident, the road accident, so many, the food security issues and so on. So I would quickly come on that what government is trying to do. Government has committed a lot of money, but they have not been able to reach out to the people. As I said, that the government do not have any data and any details about that. And on top of it, when this whole crisis is happening, government is more interested to fix the economical problem by amending the labor law reform. And if you read this labor law reform here in India, they are trying to basically remove the right to association, right to collective bargaining, right to access to minimum wages, right to access to social security. So all the progressive labor laws, which hard fought by the working poor over the years, the trade union movement fought so strongly over 100 years, and now the government is basically completely weakening these labor laws. Additionally, they are hunting down all the activists who are raising this big question. So at the one side, we are so busy in the COVID relief work. At the same time, we have not been able to prioritize that what exactly needs to be done. So a number of activists have been hunted down. They have been in prison. They have been, put the false charges as anti-nationals. And additionally, what government is also doing, they're trying to basically privatize all the natural resources. So they are privatizing the coal allocation. They're selling off the public sector units at the same time. So these are the measures they are taking in the name of fixing the economical problem. As a labor rights activist, I can only say that at this moment, we are completely in this. We are sort of headed towards the authoritarian regime. We are under the health emergency. At the same time, you all also are under the kind of democratic emergency where our democratic rights, all the basic labor rights, all the basic citizens' rights are completely being dismantled. And we can only talk about lastly, we can only say that at this moment, if we really need to build an international solidarity, we need to push what AEPF Social Justice Cluster is trying to push from the last couple of years on the whole idea of social protection, where the social security rights, the public health needs to be strengthened at this moment and not to be prioritized. I think that is a one more core question as far as the global solidarity is concerned. And the second most important question is about the right to the city. Look at the situation where the neoliberal narratives have been built on this whole agenda, what a lot of these large number of private sectors, a large number of neoliberal institutions talked and said that the cities are engines of economic growth. And look at that, the 2 months lockdown, the entire city's economy collapsed. Workers are going back home and in very abysmal condition. And now all the industrial federation, fraternity is asking us, will the workers come back? Will the workers come back? And as I said to those fraternity, that, the way we have, disrespected these working poor, the way we have thrown out from the cities, the way we have treated them, do you think they will come back? And on top of it, you are going to the Supreme Court. The Employers Federation is going to Supreme Court and challenging government order that we are not being able to pay the minimum wages. Please don't ask us to pay. Either you give us the government subsidy as a wage subsistence, otherwise we are not in the position to pay the wages. So the whole situation where the whole nexus between the state and the big private players are pushing these working poor and treating them as I would call it collateral. Even 1 million people die today in India, nobody bothers. Nobody bothers. It doesn't affect the middle class, it doesn't affect the elite, and doesn't affect the government. So this is my assessment of working on the ground. Lastly, I would just like to conclude here. I think at this moment, if we can think about building some kind of social process or the movement process where we make government accountable on terms of their commitment on the donation, whatever loan they have taken, whatever measures they have taken, it needs to be transparent. It needs to be more democratic. It needs to be kind of, kind of conveyed it to the people that no, these are the monies, we have taken the loans, we are also allocating a lot of money from the own contingency fund, and yet there is no accountability mechanism. If we can make kind of create a situation where we've said that no, this is a moment you have to really answer to the people, I think then there will be some ways to move forward on that. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I just wanted to talk about the ground level situation, and we are absolutely in the state of emergency, I would say that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chandan. I will move on immediately to Charles. Charles Santiago is an economist by training and has worked for non-governmental organizations such as the Coalition Against Water Privatization and Monitoring Sustainability of Globalization in Malaysia. He is a member of parliament in Malaysia now for 3 terms. He is also chairman of the ASEAN Parliamentarians Forum and chairman of the Parliament Select Committee on Human Rights and Constitutional Rights. Charles is a very old member and important member of the AEPF. Charles. Charles, you're muted. You're mute. Unmute, please.
You can hear me now. Okay. Hi, Meera and fellow friends. The report by Chandan is really worrying, deeply worrying. But the 3 minutes or the 4 minutes that you have given me, let me just focus on 3 sets of issues. One on the need for social protection and government and business accountability. We always forget business, but I think business too need to be accountable. Number 2 is to look at medicine as a public good or as a commons. And then also, since we're talking about campaigns and so on and so forth in this discussion, we need to be looking at reorganizing the economy towards renewable energy, green jobs, and also putting more investments in public health. Let me just quickly sketch out some of these ideas now. Let me just give more, the first point on social protection and government accountability. In Malaysia at this time, the government reports that so far, up to March 2020, about 660,000 Malaysians have been laid off. And these numbers will increase up to about 2.4 million later this year. So for the first time in the history of this country, you are actually looking at a staggering amount of people without jobs. Now, if you look at the way, for example, the state I come from, which is Selangor, Selangor in the last, compared to other states, Selangor in the last so many years has built social protection mechanisms in the way that where the state is managed. So, for example, if today you don't have a job and you're a single mother, most of the time single mothers for the women are the first one to be laid off. So single mothers will be naturally vulnerable. You can go to the state and ask the state for 200 ringgit every month for 240, I think, per month, in order to put food on the table for one whole year. So for every month you go to the state and then you ask the state, and the state will give you 240 ringgit every month in order for you to put food on the table. I think this is quite important because this is a practice that we have had in the state for quite some time, and the money comes from the state buffers. And right now, I can see, compared to the other states, that although people in Selangor, the state I come from, are displaced, unemployed, but there is some kind of social protection. That's number one. Number two, even in the case of healthcare, the state provides you support. The state provides you some amount of money in order for you to go to the hospital, not the public hospitals, but private hospitals. Public hospitals, for the most part, are free, although they're getting expensive depending on the kinds of diseases that you have. But in general, it's affordable. But because sometimes you are unable to go to the public sector, you go to the private sector, and the government provides you with the funds in order to go to the private sector. And we also provide free water for people who earn below a certain cutoff point. So basically, and there are many other support systems, but given the time constraint, I just want to focus on these three. And basically, if you come from the state, and if you are laid off, you will have available to you social protection mechanisms that will actually provide you a buffer till you find another job, or till the state provides you training for you to secure another job. So I think this is something that we really have to think in a big way, given the crises are almost appearing every other month or every other year, where the state, unions, as well as the employers sit together and start thinking about social protection as part of the body politic of the nation. This is something that I think is important and we need to talk about further. That's number one. Number two, I think the earlier speaker from, I think it was Hani Serag, and the speaker from MSF have talked about the need to control prices, and also Princess have talked about controlling prices. I think this is really, really quite important, because I think there is some development, major development in terms of COVID vaccine coming out of Gilead Sciences. And if you're familiar with the way Gilead Sciences managed to handle sofosbuvir, the medicine for hepatitis C, and if they apply the same method for the new vaccine for COVID-19, then it will only serve the rich and not the poor. For some of us who are not familiar with this, for the cure for sofosbuvir, you need 80 tablets in order to overcome hepatitis C, 80 tablets. And every tablet is worth $1,000 US. $1,000 US. So you need $80,000 US in order to recover from hepatitis C. If you don't recover from hepatitis C, you end up with cancer. So now Gilead Sciences is saying that they have got some developments or some vaccine that actually can become not a complete vaccine for COVID, but actually helps to speed up the process for the recovery of COVID-19. So I think we need to put pressure. We need to campaign, together with other groups to ensure that this vaccine becomes a commons or becomes a public good, or as Francis has said, as Princess has said, a people's vaccine. I think this is really quite important. Otherwise, you're going to have medicine which will be used by rich to take care of themselves, and the poor, as always, will be left behind. I think the third point, and I'll keep it short here, is that there's a need to move away to rethink the way we organize the economy and go into a green economy, renewable energy, green jobs, and green industries, and so on and so forth. And one important industry or one sector that comes to mind is the cleaning of our rivers. The cleaning of our rivers is a huge investment that the governments have to spend in order to make sure the water that we drink and the water that's running in the rivers are clean. And I think as part of the cleaning of the rivers, you also can look at anti-plastic campaign, something that again can start new jobs in terms of having non-plastic material for containers and all kinds of and other stuff that we can have to develop. So I think we need to move to new areas, and we have to also start looking at protecting jobs. Right now, we need to protect jobs, and we need to protect small and medium industries. Some of us are totally anti-business, that's fine. But if there are no small businesses, you will not have jobs. We need to have jobs, and we need to have small businesses that actually, in order to give jobs to people. And I think some of these jobs can be done. Some of the job creation that we can create in the new economy would be to clean the rivers. Massive public funding to clean rivers, to go into to move away from the use of plastics to renewable stuff, and so on and so forth. So I think this is an important moment where we need to reshape. There's an opportunity to reshape the way we think and the way we organize our economy, and also to make business as well as employees accountable, including the trade unions themselves. I think for a long period of time, trade unions have been sleeping in most part of the region. I think it's time to wake them up and say there was some job to do here. With that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. So many important points that were brought up by all the speakers. It's really difficult to comprehend how to put it all together without actually another round of response from the speakers and some discussion answering the questions. But unfortunately, we have really run out of time. But as I said, we do not see this as one webinar. We see this as a beginning of a discussion on strategy, which we would like to build into global solidarity. So one of the things that we have thought of doing, and we are open to suggestions from all the people who have participated, is to draft a petition which we could then use to build the opinion building all over the world. And some steps which we are thinking of doing in terms of building the campaign, about which we will hear from Tina. Tina will tell us a bit about some of the ideas that we have about building the campaign. But I just wanted to say, sorry, but I don't think that we can have the speakers' responses. We had thought that we could give a few minutes, but it's not possible. But I would request everybody to please write into us so that we can enrich whatever document that we produce, because a lot of people from different countries are represented here in that chat box. We really want to hear from you, and we could incorporate that in the paper we bring out, in the petition that we draft, and we request you to I think Kathy can give you an email ID in the chat box. Please do write to us. Tina, over to you to talk about the campaign that we are planning. Tina, you're muted. Unmute yourself, Tina. Tina? No.
Okay.
No. Yes. Yes, good.
Okay. Friends, comrades, allow me to wrap up towards advancing our campaigns and collective actions. This pandemic has put up front and center health and social protection demands, so that all of us, especially the poor majority and the vulnerable sectors, can survive and live with dignity. This pandemic offers us too the gateway for waging vigorous campaigns for health and social protection that could reach as many democratic forces and institutions as possible. Our campaigns need to advance the call for a rapid response from governments to focus on fighting the pandemic by the legislation and establishment of universal health care and also life-sustaining social protection programs. The call needs to be massively circulated on the social and mainstream media and forwarded to target figures, networks, and institutions. It needs to contain our priority demands. First of all, for free and decent public health care for all. Secondly, for health-related programs to sustain life. Number one is guaranteed income for the millions who are unemployed, the sick, the elderly, the PWDs. Number two is decent shelter for every family with access to water, power, and sanitation. For how can we physically distance without decent housing and running water to wash our hands 6 times a day? And number three is decent and green jobs for workers in the cities and countryside with a minimum living wage for all. How can we survive without livelihoods and a living income? So our campaigns need to show that funding could be generated by enforcing wealth taxes against the top 1% and mega corporations, by ending tax havens, by ending the immense military budgets, and transferring these funds for social needs. Hence, our campaigns need to reach out to as many parliamentarians and policy influencers, since it is imperative to legislate and establish these social programs. Our campaign needs to get the support of as many progressive scholars, prominent civil society figures, and, if possible, world leaders too. And most important, our campaigns need to be working with as many dynamic movements in our countries and region so that fighting communities and citizens groups could be involved and explain to the people their fundamental rights and that social protection and health are public goods. Without people's participation, we cannot have strong campaign coalitions at the national, regional, and global level. And we know that without their commanding presence from below, I mean people's coalitions and power, we cannot change national and global policies. So to close, let me share with you the wise words of my dear friend Mercy Fabros, who passed away recently. She and Ana Maria are the lead advocates of free and public health care for all in the Philippines. She said, campaigning for universal health care and social protection is an uphill battle. But we need to move mountains with unwavering persistence and dedication, because we are in a fight that we cannot lose. After all, this is the fight for the survival of humanity. So let me add that our campaigns on health and social protection could be great political tools for mobilizing also against growing inequality and for transformative democratic and green system change under and after this pandemic. Thank you.
Meena, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Tina. You're the only one who really, besides a couple of other people. Thank you for maintaining time. I didn't introduce Tina in the beginning, although she's pretty much known to everybody, including the participants. But Tina is co-coordinator of the AEPF for Asia. She has a long history of activism in the Philippines. She helped establish human rights programs during the Marcos dictatorship. And in Europe, she headed the Euro-wide campaign that campaigned for humane asylum policies and for refugee rights. And thank you very much, Tina. I hope that you and everybody else will give your presentations in writing so that we can put it all together. I will reiterate what Kathy has already written over there to the panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the number of responses that we have got. And we will get back to you. We see this, as I said, as a first step, and we will get back. Thank you very much from both the AEPF as well as the People's Forum, the ADB. Thank you very much.